You wake up because the fire has gone quiet. Not dead, not extinguished. Quiet. The logs still glow beneath the ash, pulsing a dull orange through the darkness of the cabin. But the usual crackling sound is gone. No hiss, no pop. No comforting noise to remind you that heat still exists in this frozen corner of the world. Just silence. And in northern forests, silence is never empty. It presses against your ears, crawls beneath your skin, sits on your chest like something heavy and starving. Outside, snow keeps falling against the cabin walls in soft, dry whispers. You can smell wet pine leaking through the old wooden cracks, mixed with another scent that definitely wasn't there before. Something rotten beneath the cold, like frozen meat forgotten at the bottom of a freezer for too many months. Your stomach tightens. The taste of metal slowly spreads across your tongue. Hunger does strange things to the brain. That's the first lie people tell themselves out here. You pull the blanket tighter and stare toward the window. Beyond the frost-covered glass, the forest stands motionless beneath the moonlight. Endless black trees, endless white snow, and then you hear it, your name. Soft at first, barely above the wind, then again, closer this time, your brother's voice. Which would honestly become comforting under normal circumstances, except your brother stopped breathing 3 days ago. The sound comes from the tree line. You freeze. Every instinct in your body tells you not to look outside again. But humans are curious creatures. That's why horror movies exist. That's also why ancient predators evolved patience. The voice calls again. Weak cold. Please. Your pulse begins hammering so hard you can feel it in your teeth. The cabin suddenly feels too small, too dark, too alive. The air thickens with the smell of damp wood and something animalistic lurking just beneath it. You tell yourself it's grief. You tell yourself it's exhaustion. You tell yourself a lot of things. That's cute, because the more your stomach twists with hunger, the clearer the voice becomes. And somewhere beyond those trees, something is listening to you breathe. That's not your imagination, that's the Wendigo. A creature born from starvation, isolation, and the horrifying moment a human being decides that survival matters more than humanity itself. According to Algonquian folklore, the Wendigo isn't just a monster hiding in the snow. It's a curse, a spiritual infection, a thing that crawls into desperate people and stretches them into something tall, hollow, and permanently hungry, which is unfortunate. Because winter has always been very good at making people desperate. Welcome back. Tonight, we're not just talking about a cannibal spirit lurking in frozen forests. We're dissecting one of the oldest psychological predators ever documented. A creature that doesn't simply hunt you. It convinces you to become it. And trust me, that's a much worse survival scenario. So dim the lights. Keep the fire burning. And maybe don't listen too carefully if you hear someone calling your name from outside tonight, especially if they should already be dead. Winter doesn't arrive quietly in the northern wilderness. It invades. First, the roads disappear beneath layers of ice and snow. Then the animals vanish. Rivers stiffen into black veins beneath frozen earth. Trees stop swaying. Even the wind begins to sound wrong. Thinner somehow, like the entire forest is slowly running out of breath. And eventually, if the cold stays long enough, people begin running out of things too. Food, humanity. Long before the Wendigo became internet fan art with deer antlers and creepy thumbnails, the tribes of the Algonquian-speaking peoples feared it as something far worse. Proof that starvation could hollow out the soul before it ever touched the body. Because according to the oldest stories, the first Wendigo wasn't born a monster. It was born a survivor. Imagine the scene. A hunting party trapped deep in a blizzard, supplies gone, snow climbing halfway up the cabin walls. The kind of cold that makes your joints ache every time you inhale. Days pass without food, then more days. Eventually, conversation stops entirely because even speaking burns too much energy. And somewhere during that endless white silence, someone looks at another human being and stops seeing a person. That's the moment the curse begins. Not the bite, not the flesh, the decision. That's what makes the Wendigo terrifying. It's not punishment for hunger. Hunger is natural, hunger is honest. The curse starts when desperation becomes permission. According to the folklore, once a person commits cannibalism in order to survive, something ancient notices. A spirit tied to greed, winter, and endless consumption enters the body like frost crawling through cracked walls. Then the transformation begins. The victim grows taller, thinner. Their skin stretches tight against bone until every movement sounds like dry branches snapping in a frozen forest. Their lips crack. Their ribs push outward beneath pale flesh. The stomach swells with unbearable emptiness, while the rest of the body wastes away. And the worst part? The more they eat, the hungrier they become. A deeply offensive business model. Honestly, the Wendigo is endless appetite given shape, a creature that consumes life but never experiences satisfaction, which suddenly makes modern society feel a little uncomfortable if you think about it for more than 6 seconds. Because humans are weirdly good at turning hunger into identity. More money, more power, more attention, more validation from strangers online who still use anime profile pictures in arguments about economics. The Wendigo would thrive on social media, not because it's evil, because it's never full. That's the real horror hidden inside the legend. The creature isn't just living in the forest. It lives inside the part of the human brain that always whispers, "Take more." And winter is very good at making that voice louder. The longer isolation continues, the more morality starts feeling negotiable. Sleep-deprived people hallucinate. Starving people stop thinking clearly. Communities fracture. Fear replaces empathy. Logic collapses beneath survival instinct. The forest watches all of it happen silently, panelly, because the Wendigo doesn't appear during humanity's strongest moments. It appears when people start believing they're alone. And somewhere out there in the snow-covered dark, beyond the reach of firelight, something impossibly tall moves between the trees with slow, deliberate steps, not hunting waiting. Because predators understand something humans hate admitting. The easiest prey are usually the ones already fighting themselves. Then you notice something strange outside the cabin window. Footprints, large ones, half buried in snow, leading directly toward the cabin door, but not a single track leading away. If you ever hear something moving outside your cabin at night, your first instinct will probably be to look. That instinct is exactly why predators survive. The Wendigo doesn't rely on brute force the way modern horror movies love to portray it. It's not some oversized forest animal sprinting through the snow like a caffeinated cryptid with anger issues. No, the creature hunts with patience, and patience is infinitely more terrifying. Most descriptions of the Wendigo share the same disturbing details. Towering height, limbs stretched too long for a human body, skin pulled tight against bone as though starvation itself physically sculpted the thing into existence. Every movement accompanied by a dry cracking sound, like frozen tree branches snapping under pressure. But the eyes are always the worst part. Sunken, colorless, endlessly hungry. Not angry. Hungry, there's a difference. Anger eventually burns out. Hunger doesn't. The smell usually arrives before the creature does. Rotting meat buried beneath snow, wet fur, damp wood, the metallic scent of old blood trapped beneath ice. Imagine the odor of a butcher shop abandoned during winter and left to freeze for months. That's roughly the point where your survival odds begin filing for divorce. And then there's the sound design. Or more accurately, the lack of it. The Wendigo rarely screams. Real predators avoid unnecessary noise. Instead, witnesses describe hearing familiar voices drifting through the trees. A friend calling for help, a missing family member whispering your name, sometimes even children crying somewhere deep in the dark. It mimics trust, because humans are biologically programmed to respond to familiar voices. Your brain reacts before logic has time to intervene, which is honestly a design flaw humanity should have patched several thousand years ago. The hunting pattern itself follows a horrifyingly intelligent progression. First comes isolation. The creature waits until victims are cut off from safety, snowstorms, dead radios, broken vehicles, empty supplies. The environment does half the work for it. Then comes exhaustion, sleep, deprivation begins twisting perception. Hunger clouds judgment. The cold slows reaction time while paranoia quietly settles into the nervous system like a parasite. That's when the Wendigo starts testing you. Small noises outside, footsteps circling camp, brief glimpses of movement between trees. Never enough to confirm anything, just enough to make you question yourself. And the more uncertain you become, the more vulnerable you are. Phase 3 is where things become deeply unpleasant. Suggestion. You begin smelling food that doesn't exist, hearing conversations from empty rooms. Sometimes victims report seeing loved ones standing motionless beyond the tree line, illuminated by moonlight, silently waiting. The creature studies emotional weakness the way wolves study injured prey. Finally comes the last stage. Consent, that's the horrifying word hidden beneath the folklore. The Wendigo doesn't simply attack people. It pushes them toward a choice. Every hallucination, every night of starvation, every psychological crack slowly drives the victim toward abandoning morality in exchange for survival. And once that line breaks, the transformation starts. Because according to the oldest legends, the creature outside your cabin is only half the problem. The other half is the thing growing quietly inside your thoughts. Which explains why survivors often describe a strange moment before encountering the Wendigo directly. A brief instant where their own reflection no longer feels entirely human. You glance toward the frost-covered mirror hanging beside the cabin door. At first, everything looks normal. Then the fire shifts, and for half a second, your reflection smiles before you do. Hunger changes the way reality sounds. That's the first thing nobody tells you. People assume starvation is just weakness, shaking hands, dizziness, slower thoughts. But prolonged hunger does something much worse. It rearranges the architecture of your mind. Familiar sounds become distorted. Shadows start feeling intentional. Time stretches strangely inside isolated places. And eventually, your own thoughts stop sounding like your own. By the sixth night trapped inside the cabin, the sleep becomes almost impossible. Every time your eyes close, you hear movement outside. Slow footsteps circling through snow. Not rushing. Never rushing bull. The fire barely stays alive now. Weak orange light flickers across the wooden walls, making the entire room breathe in slow pulses. Melted frost drips from the ceiling with soft tapping sounds. Somewhere beneath the floorboards, you swear you can hear chewing. Tiny bites. Wet chewing. Your stomach twists violently. The smell hits next. Roasted meat, rich, warm, impossible. You immediately search the cabin, heart hammering against your ribs hard enough to hurt, but there's nothing cooking. No food left, no animals caught in traps. Just empty shelves and cold air. Still, the smell lingers. And the more you try ignoring it, the stronger it becomes. That's how psychological predators operate. They don't force doors open. They wait for your own mind to unlock them voluntarily. The longer starvation continues, the more the Wendigo blurs the line between instinct and suggestion. Victims report hearing conversations inside walls, seeing movement crawl across ceilings. Some begin sleepwalking into the forest without remembering leaving the cabin at all. But the hallucinations are rarely random. They're personal, targeted, cruel, which is why you nearly stop breathing when you look up and see your brother sitting beside the fire. Calm, silent, exactly the way he looked before the storm took him. Snow still clings to his jacket sleeves. His skin is pale beneath the dim light, but otherwise he seems normal, almost comforting. And somehow, that makes this infinitely worse. Because deep down, part of you wants him to be real. He stares into the flames for a long moment before speaking softly. "You left me out there." The words hit harder than fear ever could. Guilt spreads through your chest like ice water. You remember the blizzard, the screaming wind, the impossible choice between dragging him through waist-deep snow or saving the last of your strength to survive the night. You survived, he didn't. The cabin suddenly feels too warm, too small. Your pulse thunders in your ears while your brother slowly turns his head towards you. Then you notice something wrong. His smile stretches too wide, not exaggerated, just incorrect. Like something learned, human expressions from observation, but never fully understood where they should stop. "You were hungry," he whispers. And there it is, the real infection. Not claws, not teeth. Justification: the Wendigo doesn't corrupt people through violence first. It corrupts them through permission. It waits for exhausted minds to rationalize terrible things until morality erodes quietly beneath survival instinct. The more isolated you become, the more reasonable monsters start sounding. Which is why ancient tribes feared the creature so deeply. They understood something modern society desperately tries to ignore. Human beings are disturbingly adaptable. Given enough cold, enough fear, enough desperation, almost anyone can become dangerous. Honestly, civilization is held together by snacks and stable temperatures more than people would like to admit. Your brother stands slowly from beside the fire, except his body keeps rising. Taller, thinner, bones crack beneath skin like snapping ice. His jaw distends with wet popping sounds while his shadow stretches across the cabin wall. Impossibly long, impossibly narrow. And when he finally speaks again, the voice coming from his mouth is your own. You're starving. Then the cabin door begins to knock from the outside, 3 slow knocks, and something beyond the wood is breathing heavily enough for you to hear it over the storm. Survival guides always sound impressive when written far away from danger. Stay calm, stay together, maintain the fire, avoid isolation. Never follow voices in the dark. Sybil advice. Unfortunately, the Wendigo specializes in turning simple things into impossible things, because survival itself slowly becomes the problem. The storm outside intensifies by morning. Snow crashes against the cabin walls hard enough to rattle the windows, while freezing wind forces itself through every crack in the wood. The fire burns weak now, reduced to shallow orange light and bitter smoke. You haven't eaten in 2 days. Blurred, your hands shake constantly. Every breath hurts. And somewhere beyond the forest, something keeps walking in slow circles around the cabin. Crunch, 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 always just far enough away to make you wonder if you imagined it. That's how predators preserve energy. They let fear exhaust prey before the real attack begins. Ancient tribes understood this. That's why many survival traditions surrounding the Wendigo weren't merely physical rules. They were psychological defenses. Stay near other people. Share food equally. Keep talking. Keep the fire alive, because the creature thrives when isolation turns human beings inward. The real danger was never just starvation, it was selfishness. That's the terrifying brilliance hidden inside the folklore. The Wendigo isn't simply a monster created by hunger. It's what happens when survival becomes more important than community. A spiritual warning wrapped inside a predator story. And honestly, modern society may have accidentally turned that warning into an instruction manual. Look around. People consume endlessly now: food, attention, volvulation, content, outrage. Entire industries survive by keeping human beings emotionally starving enough to keep scrolling forever. Always hungry, never satisfied, the Wendigo would absolutely dominate social media algorithms. A creature built entirely around endless consumption? That thing would get a podcast within a week. And maybe that's why the legend still works centuries later. Because deep down, everyone recognizes the hunger, not physical hunger. The other kind, the need to be seen, to matter, to consume enough success, money, status, affection, or distraction to finally silence the emptiness clawing at the inside of the human mind. But the Wendigo teaches a brutal lesson. Nothing consumed without balance will ever fill the void. It only makes the void larger. Another violent gust shakes the cabin. The knocking returns, 3 slow knocks against the front door. Knock, 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 then silence. Your entire body locks in place, the fire dims lower. And suddenly, through the thin wooden walls, you hear your own voice speaking from outside, cold, weak, terrified. Please let me in. Every muscle in your body tightens instantly, because the voice is perfect, not similar. Perfect. You stumble backward, pulse exploding in your throat, while frost begins creeping across the inside of the windows. The temperature drops so quickly your breath fogs the air in desperate bursts. Then the voice speaks again, closer this time. You left me out here. Something scratches slowly across the cabin door, not claws, fingernails. Human fingernails. The survival instructions suddenly replay through your head. Never answer the voice, never open the door, never let it isolate you from yourself. Because the final stage of the Wendigo isn't physical transformation, it's surrender. The moment exhaustion becomes acceptance, the moment hunger finally convinces you that morality is optional, and standing there in the collapsing warmth of that dying cabin, listening to your own voice beg for mercy from the other side of the door, you realize the creature was never trying to get inside. It was waiting for you to invite it in willingly. The terrifying thing about the Wendigo isn't the creature itself. It's the possibility that the creature is simply what remains after hunger strips everything human away. That's why the legend survived for centuries, not because people feared monsters in the woods, because they feared what desperation could turn people into. The Wendigo is a mirror disguised as a predator, a reflection of greed, isolation, obsession, and consumption stretched into something tall enough to walk through forests without being seen clearly. It represents the part of humanity that keeps taking long after survival stops being necessary. And the worst part? That hunger never truly disappeared, it just evolved. Now it wears expensive suits, corporate logos, social media accounts, smiling faces asking for more attention, more money, more control, more everything. Still starving. Always starving. Maybe the ancient tribes understood something modern civilization forgot. Human beings survive through community. The moment people start feeding on each other, emotionally, spiritually, financially, physically, the Wendigo wins not metaphorically, spiritually. Which brings us to the question everyone asks. Can you survive an encounter with one? Technically, yes. Stay with others, protect the fire, the voices, never isolate yourself, and above all else, never convince yourself that becoming cruel is necessary to survive. Because according to the oldest stories, that single thought is where the transformation truly begins. Survival chance, 12%. Not because the creature is unstoppable, but because hunger has always been humanity's favorite excuse. So tonight, if you wake up and notice your house suddenly feels too quiet, if the darkness outside your window feels deeper than it should, if you hear a familiar voice calling your name from somewhere far away where no one should possibly be standing, don't answer immediately, and maybe check whether the hunger you're feeling actually belongs to you. Sweet dreams, assuming the forest lets you sleep.